Now I get the privilege of introducing a couple from the West, or the other Canada, as I'm told. Right? I hear they're going to separate, so we're just wondering if there's certain places in Ontario outside the GTA you'd be willing to take with you would be my question. So the first session is going to talk on farmers using microbes. Our speakers will be Derek and Tannis Axten. This session is sponsored by CanGrow Crop Solutions. So Derek and Tannis are third-generation farmers in southern Saskatchewan, along with their children Kate and Brock. They were recently chosen as Saskatchewan's 2017 Outstanding Young Farmers. Derek returned to take over the family farm after completing a diploma in farm and ranch management, and together with Tannis' background in education, specifically biology, they began to farm. After frustrations with performance from their depleted soils, they sought innovative ideas to improve, specifically by investigating how soil functions and the biology of the soil. To improve their greatest resource, they have introduced intercrops, companion crops, cover crops, as well as controlled traffic farming and grazing. These new techniques have reduced synthetic inputs, increased water retention, and built up organic matter. The holy grail, I think I'm told, is that one is. A microscope is an essential tool on their farm. Tannis and Derek use microscopes to assess biological activity levels in their soil and various compost products. With this information, they can determine what their soils need to maintain a robust web of biological activity. Please join me in welcoming the 2017 Saskatchewan Outstanding Young Farmers to make their presentation here to us.
Awesome. Can everyone hear us okay? Good. Well, good morning, innovative farmers. My name is Derek, and this is my wife, Tannis, and we are more than excited to be here today to talk to you about our farm. We're going to basically take you guys on a bit of a journey to sort of show you that what our journey was and how we became to really think differently about our soils and how that really began to change our management and how how we started to change the things we do every time that we went to the field to do an operation. Everything we did with the soil was thought about differently. Sorry, I'm...
Ready?
Yeah. Excuse me.
Okay, so, can you hear me? Oh, there we go. We'll start in the beginning. Derek and I were married in 2002. Derek is the only son of an only son, so we knew we had the opportunity to take over the family farm. We considered ourselves traditional, conventional farmers, and we farmed very similar to the way our fathers had farmed. We grew strictly monocrops. We got her down to a science. We were down to 4 crop varieties. Our accountant kind of pushed us to get down to a minimum amount of crops so that we could be very efficient. And I don't know about in your communities, but in ours, it's kind of a race to see who can get started seeding first and who can be done first. I don't know why, it's the way it is. Actually, I do know why. It's so that you can get your spraying done and get to the lake. So, and Derek and I, we fell into this. We got done things as quick as we could, as efficient as we could. We even bought a seasonal at a campsite and a camper, but we don't really like camping. You kind of fall into what everyone else is doing, and we really found we were. We were very plant-focused. We relied on our agronomist to tell us what our plants, or what he felt our plants needed, and that's what we did. We were growing commodities. We were growing for the markets. We weren't really thinking of what we were doing is growing food. And as everyone knows, when you're trying to decide if you're a good farmer or not, it comes down to how your yields are. So we focused on our high yields, and we wanted to do whatever it took to get those high yields. Because if you have higher yields, we were making more money. We used variable rate fertility. We used whatever insecticides and fungicides were necessary to control our pests. And we used herbicides to control weeds. We were also under the social pressure thinking in order to be successful, we needed more land. And after we were first married, we continued to buy more and more land. And thought more land, more money, life would be good. So as we got into this, we kept wondering at what cost? Monocrops, yes, we were very efficient, but it also meant less diversity. Also meant, when we were down to 4 crops, we had less markets that we were selling into, which meant more risk. We also were finding with the tight rotation, we were getting more and more disease pressure. So higher yields, we always talk about yields, but so often we forget about what inputs, what is the cost of this high yield. We were also finding we were getting increased pests and disease, chemical-resistant weeds. And as we know globally, as we grow higher yields, so often that means a lower price. With more land, we needed more help. I don't know what it is like for most of you, but we really struggle with labor, which really means more stress. So we kind of felt like we were in a downward spiral, and we knew that we needed balance. We wanted it all. We want the high yields. We want to make money. We want productive soils. We want less stress. We want to connect with the consumer and grow food, not a commodity. We need diversity, clean water, high organic matter. We want to be farming so that there's a farm there for the next generation. And we want to do this all with less risk. So we felt that there is balance. It's possible if you have the right mindset. Which leads us to the quote that Mel has on the front, there's a way to do it better, just have to find it. So after years of tunnel vision and thinking farming needs to be done a certain way, we found a light at the end of the tunnel, and for us that was improving soil health. So as we've been going down this path, it's been exciting and fun, and it's really brought inspiration and optimism back to farming for us.
Okay, so bear with me a little bit. This is Tannis and I actually. It's our first, since the OIF event in Penticton, this is the first time we've shared the stage, so we're still getting used to working around each other on the stage. So just bear with us a bit. This is, I got to give you guys some background. It's a bit of a time travel because there's a really intricate sequence of events that happened in my life, our life, that changed our entire operation. And started in 2005. 2005, we were the happiest grain farmers there was, or so we thought. You know, and our biggest concern at the time was how much fertilizer we could place or safely place with our seed. And this is what we were seeding with. But the interesting thing that happened that year was we bought a corn planter to seed some corn silage for our cows. But it was our first exposure to a disc opener. Western Canada, there's disc openers were very, very few and far between. But it amazed me how this thing could put the seed in through the dry soil above and into the moisture below in such a nice, delicate way. And that was one of the things that started the wheels turning for me. Spring of 2006, we're still, fertilizer was still a bit of the focus. We had this drill that was called a seed hawk out, so we can put more fertilizer down, and it was more accurate. But maybe you can't see, but there is a lot of piles on the headlands here. And that was sort of put the brakes on buying the seed hawk, luckily. At the same time, I was talking to the guy that was my college roommate from Olds College, had become the farm manager, and John Deere had a drill up there at the college seeding called an 1895. We had never heard of such a thing, low disturbance opener. A friend of mine says, well, maybe you should look into these disc drills, because maybe, using less moisture or losing less moisture at seeding will be a benefit for your operation. So I got on the old Tandy or whatever we had there in 2006, and lo and behold, the closest disc drill that we could find was in Gettysburg, South Dakota. So we traveled down to Gettysburg in 2006 in the summer, and this is actually the only picture of that drill I can find, and you can tell, good thing we had kids or we wouldn't have had pictures of any farm equipment. So we seeded, we went down to Gettysburg, made a deal on the drill, and when we're standing in the salesman office, he said, well, if you're coming to buy a disc drill, you must be going to Pierre to visit Dr. Dwayne Beck to see what he's doing with disc drills, and because this is I didn't realize at the time, but that's kind of the that was sort of ground zero for this whole soil health movement, and didn't know anything about Dr. Beck. I went home after buying the drill, did my research, and contacted Beck, and we went back in the summer of 2007 and met this man, who is definitely probably the most pivotal man in our career. Words can't say enough to the things that he's done to our operation, but basically the first time we went down to visit Beck, if anybody's ever been there, he takes us out to this irrigator, and I was like, well, I don't need to see an irrigator, we don't irrigate in Minton. But the point of the trip was, we pull up beside this irrigator, and he says, how much rain do you think this thing's putting on? And I don't, half an inch, I don't know. It's putting on 2 inches in 9 minutes. Oh, well, it's at Minton, if we had 2 inches in 9 minutes, it'd be running down the ditches, it'd be running across the roads, it'd be running everywhere. It was going in the soil. And remember, at this point, I didn't know anything about anything. And that hit so hard, and it took so much, I guess, and at that same trip, he talked to us about diversity and high carbon rotations, and thinking about your soil and soil biology and things that I didn't have a clue about. But, we went home, and after many trips back to Beck's, we finally started to get it, slowly but surely. And there's, Dr. Beck introduced us to people like Gabe Brown, who probably one of the trips to his place to show that the management is what changes things. And it was really interesting to meet all these different people, but they all connect back to Dr. Beck. And one of the other interesting guys that we met that introduced us to David Brown was, I'm sorry, I had a bit of a, Bill Callahan. He's actually a fellow from Ontario that introduced us to David Brandt at No Till on the Plains, and it was the meeting of that got Tannis into Dr. Wendy Tahiri's AMF course. And it's amazing how these kind of conferences and meeting these people and these little intricacies can completely change your career. So I guess that kind of gets us sort of up to current day. This is our farm today. We are a 6,000 acre grain farm spread out over about 75 miles. The bottom star is the metropolis of Minton, Saskatchewan, and the other star is Milestone, so we farm in two very distinct soil zones and rainfall zones, but at home, where most of our land is about a 12 to 14 inch rainfall. And this is basically our yard about a year ago. Our compost pile's out behind. So we have learned that we need goals. And it's funny how I've been to lots of conferences and I've seen these same goals posted many times, but it's funny how these all ring very true for us. Basically starting with keeping that soil covered, and the rest follow through. I'm sure you guys, I don't have to read them off for you, but the last one was we've brought the livestock back. We actually were a cow operation, but we brought the livestock back to the operation with a combination of a partnership with some neighbors, and it's been a really good working relationship. So I get asked a lot when we do these things about, what's the one magic bullet or what's the one thing that you do that really makes a difference, and I don't think there is one thing on our farm. I guess the goal is what you see in the middle, with the improvement in the soil, but it's a whole bunch of different things that we do that makes our operation what it is today. And I think we started with live roots because I think it's maybe one of the most important things, and I know for us being in a dry environment that a lot of people really wonder how we can afford to give up moisture, but it isn't giving up moisture as it is building our system bigger and more resilient. We start with low disturbance, and we're a controlled traffic farm. We're going into our 4th year of controlled traffic. We use stripper headers, and stubble retention is a huge part of that. We're highly diverse in our cash crops. We always have over 10 different crops in rotation. We're intercropping as many crops as we can. All of our broadleaf acres the last 3 years have been intercropped. We've basically stopped using synthetic fertility. We're down about 85% now from what we were. And with that reduction of synthetic inputs, we've went to a compost and carbon-based inputs. So obviously with that compost around, we've started making extracts and teas, and with that, to try to spread that diversity over more acres, because it's a bit of a struggle to get compost spread on that many acres every year over our land-based area. And then when we re-inoculate these soils, we want to make sure that biology has a happy place to be, and that's where the cover crops come in. We want to have a live root to keep that biology functioning. And then we brought the livestock back in, just one more layer.
So as we went away from focusing on the plants, we started to learn about the soil food web and how the soil actually functions. I took Dr. Elaine Ingham's online courses, and it was really eye-opening to actually understand how the soil is supposed to function. I was fascinated by the microbiology and very interested in how it can actually cycle so many of the nutrients for us. So when we look at the soil food web, I've been to lots of places and they ask, well, what's the most important thing in this food web? Some say the sun. Derek usually says the live roots, loves his cover crops. So there's a big focus on fungi, mycorrhizal fungi right now. But if you ask me, it's everything. We can't just focus on the plants or on the fungi or on the bacteria or on the sun. We need the balance of everything to make the system function properly. So having a look at the soil really opened up our eyes. It made the soil come alive to us and become real. The first time I looked at our soil was a very sad day for me. I had learned all these exciting organisms you can find in the soil, but all I could see was bacteria. So I was quite disappointed, but we had a starting point and we knew what we wanted to start looking for and start finding. So as we've been working at our soils and the combination of what we do, we are starting to see more diversity, some beneficial nematodes, protozoa, microarthropods, and it's a lot of fun. As we start seeing this life in our soils, it helps remind us that it is a living ecosystem, and everything that we do on our farm affects this environment.
So just to run quickly through sort of the operations or the things we've been doing on our farm, and obviously we start with seeding a crop, and we want to seed with as low as disturbance as possible because we want to maintain that surface residue for lots of reasons. One other neat little thing about this picture that I wanted to have on here is this little Valmar right here. Since we've been a controlled traffic farm, we've been actually really struggling with how to introduce pollinator strips into our farm, and this year we started seeding short season perennials, I guess if you want to call it, different mixes. So in our field, every 60 feet, we'll have 2 little strips of pollinator strips all through our field, which hopefully fixes a whole bunch of problems, because controlled traffic has got some issues that worry me about rutting and things like that. And if we can seed a perennial, that we have something to drive on, stop the erosion problems, stop the rutting problems and whatnot. But yeah, this is what kind of like what we'd like to see on our farm. These are just very simple single disc drills, nothing complicated. And we like to follow those drills with stripper headers. It took us a couple of years to figure it out. The first year we had our 1895. The harvest before, we had combined with John Deere 9600 combines with really poor choppers and 36-foot macked-on heads. So you can imagine the mess that we had of 25-foot strips of poorly, spread residue. So now with these stripper headers, we're just finding if it doesn't go in the combine, we don't have to redistribute it. We have this beautiful cover of residue, long-lasting. It helps create a bit of a microclimate down in there near the soil surface. And the other really cool thing about it is the snow distribution. We're very hilly, so if we get a big snowstorm, if we have bare ground, we have snowbanks that are 17 feet deep on the side hills, and the hilltops are bare. Then we have a big runoff problem. In the strip stubble, it keeps the snow nice and even, and the snow also stays fluffy. What usually happens with all of our driving windstorms, we get these snowbanks that are really hard, so the stripper header's got lots of benefits. And the other really cool thing is the heat of the sun warms up the straw, and you can see actually around the straw that the snow is melting around the straw first, and a lot of the times the strip stubble fields are the first ones we're on in the spring. So just a bit of an idea of diversity on our farm. We are growing, I guess in 16 we had 16 different crops. In 1 year that was too much. We learned that was too much to manage, so we pared it back to about 12 and 17. We try to grow as many different crop types as we can. One of the ones we're struggling with, and I know you guys can do, is warm season grasses. And we struggled for a warm season grass to work, so we're going to fit that in our cover crops. But we want to grow all of the 4 crop types, and right now we're growing sunflowers is kind of the only warm season broadly for growing. But we're growing mostly cool season crops and as many combinations as we possibly can. This is one thing we usually talk a lot about, and we're gonna have a breakout session, so we'll just clip through these quick. New one for us this year was sunflowers and hairy vetch, and the one that I like to talk about a lot is this flax and chickpeas. That's been a life-changing intercrop for us. Chickpeas were big for us back in the early 2000s, but disease and a whole bunch of things went wrong, and a lot of it was management related now that we look back. And now when we grow these in an alternate row intercrop like that, we've eliminated the use of fungicides, which is almost unheard of. It was something that if you would have told me that in 2000, I would have thought you were just lying. Simple as that. Because we were doing 5-6 passes. My neighbors today are still doing that, 5 or 6 passes of fungicide in order to make a chickpea crop work, and we can do it without any. So it's just little simple changes like this that have really changed how we think about it. So yeah, I guess quickly here again, what they look like. This is, I guess, a distance shot, but we grow both a Desi type and a Kabuli type, 2 different kinds. The Desis are more disease resistant, but they have 2 different markets, so it's a little bit about market diversity for us. If anybody's ever grown garbanzos or been around them, if you see flowers on a plant like this and open the canopy and look down inside, normally this time of year you're going to see a bunch of cornflakes on the ground because leaves are drying up from disease and dropping, but here we are, no fungicide sprayed yet, and nice clean right to the bottom. And a lot of people ask us about harvest, but I mean, it's not a big deal. This is a sample. There's flax and chickpeas in the grain tank. Very easy to set the combine. Works great. It's definitely nothing to worry about. Other ones that we've been growing is canola and peas. We started off with some really basic yellow pea varieties because, well, we had to start somewhere. And we soon learned that there's some specialty peas that we can grow that lay down, like forage peas, winter peas, maple peas. These peas, they're worth more for a reason because they're a nightmare to harvest because they lay down and you're in the dirt and it's, you know, they won't dry underneath. But we put them in a canola crop and they can trellis up the canola plants and all of a sudden harvest is a breeze. And so that's been sort of the way we've gone with the canola pea. A new one this year for us was flax and lentils because I finally started to try to think like a plant, sort of. You know, I'm a lentil plant and what don't I like? Well, when I get lots of pods, I lay down on the ground and then I suck to harvest. So, well, give me something to climb up and then it's not so bad. So we put it with flax because we want to strip as many acres as we can. And you know, if we can have them standing upright, and the plant architecture will actually change, you know, because the plants have to reach for the light and, or, you know, and grow up with the flax, and it just worked phenomenally. Normally, I'm pretty sure all my buddies had a bet that this was going to be a train wreck because flax and lentils really aren't that close maturity-wise on their own, but we put them together and we didn't have an issue at all. Harvested well, you know, there's things that go on that I wish I could explain, but it's just good to know that it's happening. I guess I put this in quickly just to show how we like to do our harvesting. We have John Deere rotary combines. We use large wire concaves, just something simple we've learned. But just it was a quick showing of flexing and stripping. This is what it looks like when we strip, and this is what it looks like when we flex, and it's a huge difference for us. You know, residue distribution is a major priority for us. So we strip as many as we can, but we had an unfortunate, a little bit of snow 2 years ago, and it caused us to run flex headers on 1/4 section. And yeah, I was really disappointed. So we strip as many acres as we can, but yeah, harvest for the intercrops has been really easy. So then now you have these 2 crops, and now what, right? Well, we started off with very simple rotary screen. It wasn't a big deal. We ran a rotary screen for maybe 3 years to separate our crops. We actually still own it. We've tried a quick clean. They're okay. But we got heavy enough into this acres-wise and bushels-wise that we finally invested in this, what became it's a mobile grain cleaner. So it just has like a scalper aspirator and a set of indents, a big air screen, and a big gravity. So we can separate intercrops anywhere between, say, 500 and 800, 900 bushels an hour, depending on what's in the mix. And then when it comes off the gravity table, like our peas, lentils, chickpeas, our large seed will be basically export or seed clean. And then we separate our refuse into a different truck. The refuse goes to our compost program. And then the small seed, flax, canola, mustard, whatever it is, goes into another truck. And it's clean enough to sell on its own, or else we can re-clean it later. But the really cool thing about this cleaner is it opened doors that I didn't even know existed before we bought this. We're now growing gluten-free oats for an oat program in Regina that requires clean product. We've become certified seed growers, so we're selling pedigree seed. And we're also selling cover crop seed, which is something that I didn't see coming. I mean, we like using cover crops, but it's becoming a bigger part of our business all the time. It allows us to add more diversity to our operation. We're growing things now like buckwheat and millets, things that we never would have grown until we had a cover crop market for them. So while we're talking about cover crops, that's become a very, very important piece of our operation. Once we learned and started thinking about the fact that this is a live system under our feet, and the way to feed it and drive it is with root exudates, the cover crops, we just knew we had to do it. I was very nervous when we started into the cover crops because we are limited on moisture, and we were sure that this was going to cause us problems, but we're seeing the opposite. I mean, we've been seeing improvements that we didn't think we could see in a short amount of time, and the cover crops are definitely a big part of that. And for us, a part of it is the living cover, but this little chart here, and we get warm in the summertime. I'm not sure if you can see it in the back, but basically it says that at 100 degrees Fahrenheit, only 15% of the moisture is used for growth, but 85% of that moisture is lost through evaporation and transpiration. And simply here on a 90-degree day in Minton, Saskatchewan, I went out with my little handy-dandy thermometer, and below the residue, we're about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and without residue, we're easily at 100, and that was just at 90. We get days where we get over 100. So this is what it's doing to your soil biology. When you get up higher, eventually your bacteria even start to die. So we want to keep that ground covered as much as possible, and covers are definitely one of the ways that we're doing it. Just a couple examples of some of the covers. I'm going to spend a bit of time on covers because I just feel how important they are to our operation. One of the bigger ones that we've grown, we struggle because of our short growing season to get enough growth from our cover crops. So we basically run the drill right behind the combines now to maximize every day that we can. We grow as diverse as we can. We add in, basically, when we look at our rotation, if we can't have that crop type in our crop rotation, we add it as a cover crop. So warm season grasses are becoming a big part of our covers. And here, this is just a multi-species seeded into a fall rye in October, and we actually got to be about knee high, which is for us is huge. I mean, that's a lot of growth and a lot of residue for us. But the big thing about these covers for us is if we can gain this soil organic matter that we so dearly need to replenish, that we've, at the past 100 years that we made go away, we need to put that back in. And for every 1% organic matter is about an acre inch. And for us, if we get 6 or 7 inches of rain, and the same thing if you're getting too much rain. It's a sponge. It makes the sponge bigger. We need to hold that water regardless of your rainfall or your management system. And some really late seeded ones. I mean, we've seeded, fairly late for us, and it's always surprising, even if the top growth isn't big, how much growth we get below the soil surface. This one this is the latest seeded cover we've ever done. This was the end of September, and it's my son's little finger. We were out digging around, and we were very surprised. We were kind of disappointed looking at it, but when we dug them up with the shovel, we were very surprised at what kind of root growth we actually had below the soil surface. And if we know that all these different crop types are pumping out different kind of root exudates and putting carbon back in the soil, that's driving our system, and it's really given us the confidence now to just seed covers, until freeze up. So something new we've been trying, or I guess I actually thought I had invented something until I put it on Twitter, and I promptly got shot down. So living mulch, and I guess this is like old hat in France, and so I had to quickly retract. But we seeded faba beans, and then we shifted over and seeded alfalfa inter-row with the faba beans. And this is at the harvest, obviously. There's our faba bean swaths, and the alfalfa's undersowed. And then when the combine rolled, this is a drill seeding right behind it, and we seeded fall rye right into which normally, had I not got some confidence, this should never have worked in Minton where it doesn't rain, right? But here we have rye rows, we had establishment. And then that next year, I guess we didn't need to have any rain, so that was this past season. We were very dry, and we basically we had about 4/10 of rain on the 4th of April and then a half an inch on the 14th of June. And that was our entire rainfall for the year. So, yeah, you can imagine, right? We had fall rye and unbelievable, even competing with that alfalfa. And I had some mistakes were made along the way as far as getting the alfalfa set back. But this is the rye, and I know it doesn't sound like a lot to you guys, but we still combined 20 bushels of rye, competing, for a while because I didn't do my terminations of my alfalfa correctly. But we still harvested a crop, and that just showed me the power of the diversity and the things that are capable of. So I'm really excited for next year when we get rain, what we can do. So once we started to think, now that we're always thinking, live root, and overlap, one of my problems with the fall seeded covers has been the fact that at harvest, there's a period there where the crop matures, and then you have to harvest it, then you seed it, and then the crop comes out of the ground, and that can be maybe a month for us, which is a huge portion of our sunlight that we have been giving up. So we started to grow these companion crops that I call them. I'm not sure if that's the technical term, but so we seed a mixture of clovers mostly with our annual crops. We're doing it with all of our intercrops now, so that clover grows the entire time. So now the canola pea or whatnot matures, and at the same time there's that live root underneath growing the whole time. So in the center picture, this is the windrow of canola pea, and you can see the clovers are green growing below. And I just think it's such a nice jump start on a cover crop for us. Here's harvest. I pulled a canola root, I pulled a red clover root. So for us, we've got this huge jump start. Now we have this, we're bridging that gap, right? That's what, and it's, when you think about the canola too, thinking about bridging gaps, I like to think how now we're growing this pulse crop and this clover in with what was a non-mycorrhizal crop. That's the problem with brassicas, is they don't, and now that we realize how important the mycorrhizae are to our system, to grow a brassica crop by itself for a year is really starving that mycorrhizae for a year, and it can really set us back. So, having the clover, having the peas, it's bridging that year for us. Just a quick, people always ask us, what do you go for cover crops? Well, I tell people, look at your own system, right, and fill in the holes in your own puzzle, right, because everybody has a different crop rotation, everybody has different goals, but these are just some of the ones that we've been using. One of the neat ones, I think, for us now is that we've been starting to experiment with has been a sugar beet. It's a chenopod, which is a different crop type family than anything we've ever used before. And the really cool thing about this, I'm not sure if you guys have salinity here, but it's something that we're battling with. And in the background, you can see this is in the most saline spot on our farm, and the oats are looking pretty sad and, piddly back there. But that sugar beet's just ready to party. I couldn't believe how big it grew. The sugar beets took a little time to germinate and establish, but once they grew in that salinity like really, really well. So we're quite excited about sugar beets. And Phacelia, I guess there's a picture of Phacelia. We put Phacelia in every single mix. I'm not sure if it just puts out more root exudate or what it does, but the soil structure that follows a cover crop with Phacelia is phenomenal. We incorporate livestock on every acre that we have a fence around, which is probably over half of our farm in that ballpark. We've done the 24-hour, multi-paddock grazing. Basically now when we do that, we'll just, if we have a field that has really needs a jump start, that's where we'll do it. But we don't own cows, and I guess if any of you have ever dealt with a cowboy, you know how cheap they are. So it's pretty hard to share that, and Ryan, if he was here, he would tell you he's cheap. The guy that we work with. It's hard to share that amount of profit, with another guy, especially a really cheap one, and everybody to be happy. So what we found is we're doing mostly winter grazing now. To take your land out, or not out, but to do a full season cover, if you're used to the annual gross returns from an annual crop, this is, it's not as much. And we're working to make that better. And it's a learning process, but we're still doing a bit of the full season cover crops, but not as much as we did right off the bat. So the bulk of it now is we get cows out in the fall. I think Rick Bieber's in the audience. He calls it flash grazing, and that's basically what we do. Because we're lucky enough that our cow guy has got a large herd. He'll bring about 600 cows in a bunch to do our grazing, so we don't have to do small paddocks. We can just flash them across, and it works really well. So one other piece of our puzzle has been control traffic farming, and I think Steve LaRock was actually here to talk about this to you guys maybe a year or two ago. And Steve was definitely the catalyst in us becoming, using the control traffic. And the interesting thing about the Steve story was when I went there the first time, it seemed like when going to Beck's, when he put the shovel in the ground and he pulled it up, and that's the first time I had seen any soil that even closely resembled Beck's as far as structure. Maybe biologically it's not as good, but structure-wise, it really, really made me think this is something I need to do because I'm impatient and I want to have my soil as good as possible, as soon as possible. So we're going to adopt as many practices as we possibly can to get us there. And right or wrong, we are giving control traffic a fair try. It is now, we're going into our 4th year, and we've selected a 30-foot system just because of logistics and whatnot, but that's kind of what things look like at our place on a year where it doesn't rain very much. And I think that's mustard and lentils, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, yeah, so I mean, and I also think it's a big piece because it gives us some opportunities to do things, again, that I never thought we could do. And relay seeding is one of them. We really, really want to have our cover crops growing as long as possible. This is something I've been working on for 4 years and haven't had great success yet, but we are trying to relay seed our covers into our standing annual crops. This picture here is from 2016. 2015 we had a dry year and we lost a bunch of our residue, and I wasn't happy with what I saw between my rows. So I thought, well, let's go mix up some cover crop and we're going to inter-row seed. We actually did about 450 acres as our first experiment, which turned out to be way too much. Because it didn't grow. You could walk across that 450 acres and count the plants on your fingers. Because what happened, we had establishment, so I was super pumped. Like, this is going to work. And then we had some nice rain, and the crop canopied, and it just buried it. So after spending time last year at Lorenstein Loggies and learning about light and sunlight and using your light, we're going to try a little bit wider spacing. We're going to set up a seeder for the future to do this on a little bit wider spacing so we can use our light. Because we think if we can get our warm season grasses established, like in July maybe, we can get enough growth out to make this worthwhile. And actually, I think there's some guys talking here about a little bit about relay seeded, and this is on the far side. That was our attempt. This is winter wheat, and we relay seeded some lentils because that was when John Coots relay seeded beans thing was going around on Twitter, and I was like, I have to do something. So we were seeding lentils across the road, lentils and mustard. So we just came in here and seeded. And the interesting thing was where the rye was thin again. On the hilltops, we did get lentils. We didn't get enough to be worth combining, but it's amazing once you're on these tram systems, all the things that are possible. You know, that this relay thing, I think, is really going to be a step, you know, in the future for us.
So we do all this to try to improve our soil. So how do we assess it? Every time we go to the field, we have a shovel. We're always having a look, feeling, smelling. I do water infiltration tests to see how fast our soil can absorb the water. We use a penetrometer to compare compaction. We do bricks testing using a refractometer. And we also do Solvita testing. I started in 2015. It's a really nice way to compare from year to year. I do the same fields every year in the same spots. And it measures the CO2, the respiration of your microbiology in the soil. So it's nice to have things to even compare year to year on your own farm, because there's no way you can compare to a neighbor or to someone else. You need to look for improvements in your own soil. I also assess our soil using the microscope. I'm really looking for diversity. These are just some pictures, some fungi, protozoa, microarthropod. Took the course on how to identify AMF in roots, so try to get all that done too. It's very time consuming, but it's very interesting, and it tells us a lot about what's happening in our soils. We're really trying to work towards that 1-to-1 bacteria to fungal ratio, and we have a ways to go yet. In 2016, we made 14 compost windrows. We thermal compost, So in our compost, we use manure from our neighbor, from his feedlot. It's straight across the highway, so we haul it and put it into windrows. We use straw, hay, the grain screenings from the cleaner. The only thing we really don't have, we like to use native things in our compost, but one thing we don't have is trees. If you see trees, it means someone lives there, so you shouldn't cut them down. So we do haul in wood chips to get more of a woody component and add more carbon. So it's finding that carbon-nitrogen balance so that we can heat it at a nice rate and get some diversity. We use the compost as a probiotic to try to boost some of that biology back into our soil. And we also, this year out of curiosity, we sent in a compost sample to Ward Labs, and we were quite excited actually to find how many nutrients we're also putting back in. So one thing we do with the compost, well, the first picture is just the turner. We bought a windrow turner so that I monitor the temperatures, and when it's time, I send Derek out to turn it. And we use our manure spreader to spread the compost. We like to spread it, it's been working about right at 1.5 tons per acre. I had a look at each one of the windrows under the microscope to try to find my favorite piles. So I picked my top 3 this spring, and from those I made compost extract, which is basically fill the tank or the tea brewer with water, add the compost into the basket, and using air, extract the organisms out of the compost and into water. And then I'd pump it into a tank so that Derek could come and get it at seeding time. And we applied that compost extract through our liquid fertilizer system on the drill in furrow at seeding time. We also played around a little bit with compost teas. As Derek said, it was very dry this year, so we didn't have any disease pressure. But I figured the crops were happy to see any moisture at all, so they did get a little bit of compost tea. So we better keep moving. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so like Tannis was saying, we used to put on a liquid starter, pop up with the compost, and then we replaced that with the compost tea, so it was a real natural evolution for us. It worked really well. So this is a new slide that I put together that really, I was thinking about this when I was putting this slide together, because we talked to a lot of different people, and where I was too dry for cover crops, or I was too dry for diversity, and I've got friends that are too cold, and I have friends that are too wet. But I was thinking about this when I was texting. We have these 6 guys, actually there's more of us on here, but these are the only guys that gave me their rainfall, so that's who made it to the slide. We were talking about this, and I was like, this is a really good example of, we chat nearly daily through a text group, and we compare ideas, but we don't talk about growing chickpeas or specifically or the benefits of lentils and rotation. We talk about big picture things, right, and principles and our goals. And those 6 of us so Adam's down there in Cotton Plant, Arkansas, had 50 to 55 inches of rainfall, which I can't even fathom. And the amazing thing about Adam is that they actually irrigate there. Most of the guys and his neighbors irrigate nearly 20 inches of rain on top of that. And there I am and that's 12 inches, that's all year. That includes snow, the whole thing. So that's all we get. And then the other guys are in between, and Michael's more like me. He's a bit of a drier climate, but we're all doing basically the same things. It's just understanding our area and our context, right? I'm a dry guy, so I have to think about that when I'm making decisions and plants and things that I grow in covers. And then obviously Adam does the opposite, but it's really, it really made me think about this, that there aren't any excuses, right? It's just a matter of choosing things and management choices that work for you on your farm.
So everything we do is about building resilience. There's so many factors as farmers that we can't control, whether it's the weather or the markets, but we find that we do like to control things. We want to control the weeds and the pests and the nutrients. But we need to remember we're not just managing the plants we grow, but we're managing an entire ecosystem. So we feel that by being loyal to the soil and having healthy soil, we are becoming resilient. Because we don't want to farm for just this year or the next 20 years, but we want to have a thriving farm for many generations to come.
Yeah, so what we found that healthy soil is resilient soil. We're seeing things happen on our farm that we didn't think probably 5 years ago were even possible. And this year being a dry year was definitely one of those years. We went from 2016 being probably the wettest rainfall year we've ever encountered to 2017 being the driest. And I think this is maybe becoming a bit of a norm for us. The normal thing is that there is nothing normal. You know, it's been these big swings, and we want to build resiliency in our system so we can weather these big changes. And a couple other things that I forgot that I really wanted to talk to you guys about or mention is some things that has happened on our farm that I guess I haven't realized has been such a big impact. And one of those things is we haven't had to use an insecticide on our farm in 6 years, and we haven't even come close to the need to use the insecticides. You know, we had a tour group from the Ukraine here 3 years ago, and great guys. They wanted to see our intercropping system. We chit-chat on the way to the field about, crops and specifics and those sort of things. These guys step out of the truck. The first thing they said was, "How do you guys get so many ladybugs?" That was the first thing they noticed, and I said, "I don't know. I guess they're here." And we've never had an aphid problem. And in our area still, there's lots of guys, still spraying aphids. It's just, we found that the less we do, the less we have to do. I guess maybe that's been a simple way to do it. But anyway, just something I wanted to share. And this is our contact information. If anyone wants to contact us with anything good, bad, hate mail, whatever, our email is on there. We're here for the taking. Do you have time for questions, boss?
Yeah, we do have time for a couple questions. Do you want to write them? We usually write them down if we can. I'll ask the directors to go around and put up your hand if you have a question, and they'll grab the pages and bring them up here. Certainly a very in-depth and well-presented presentation there. I certainly think it's pretty obvious why you were chosen for both Saskatchewan and the Canadian Outstanding Young Farmers, for sure. So I have a question for you, and it's probably what everybody's wondering here in the room. Like, how long does it take for your soil to change? So you've been looking at it under a microscope. You've been seeing these things. When are you going to start to see something real start to show up?
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question. So when Tannis took that course, originally, we had been intercropping already for a while. We had been seeding with a disc drill, so we had a disc drill, so we were no-tillers, right? But we had been doing some diversity. But when Tannis first looked through the soil or through the microscope, that was like the most exciting and disappointing day combined of my life, because I was sure it was going to be great. It was not so great. It was the bacteria only. I think the big change for us has been in the last probably 3 or 4 years when we brought in the covers to maintain that live root, and then using the compost as a biological inoculant. I think those things in combination have been a huge change. I think Tannis could comment.
Yeah, well, I think we've gradually seen small changes, but I think we've found the biggest jump, especially the less fertilizer we've been using. I think it's been benefiting our microbiology. And yeah, we've seen a gradual improvement. There's never been a huge jump, because even with everything we did this year, it was very exciting to see an improvement, because with 1.5 inches of rain, you don't think anything can survive in the soil. But right in that root zone, there was biology, and it was doing everything it could. So I don't know that there is a magic number, but slowly but surely.
Good, thank you. I have a question here, and if someone could grab, there's a card being held up at the back there too. Someone, I know who gave this question, and I think they weren't sitting at breakfast with us, but they could have been, because the same topic came up. It says, Rodale Institute tests corn varieties for weedy conditions. Some fall apart, others thrive. Are you testing this for your no-till and companion crops? So how varieties perform in those environments?
Yeah, we grow, I mean, like obviously we're growing a lot of different crops in the year, but when we do try different varieties, we haven't seen anything stand out, but we don't grow any hybrids either. But we do look at, Tannis does pull every year at the 5-week growth stage, I think, we pull all of our roots and she looks at the mycorrhizal colonization of all, and that helps us decide a little bit where we're seeing better colonization and where we're not. And we're seeing colonization pretty good in everything, are we? Everything, obviously everything that's a host, but that's kind of been our barometer, I guess, has been sort of that's one of the big things we want to see is good mycorrhizal colonization. And yeah, I guess we have been selecting that way, I think.
Okay, a few questions I think people trying to have, and there's both of them. I'm going to put them together because I think it's people kind of saying, okay, what's the viability of what you're doing? So the one was, and I'll ask you to answer them both after I read them out, is yield compared to neighbors, and the other one is, are yield benefits and harvest at harvest enough to offset the cost of cleaning?
Yeah.
So it's really, how does this work in an economical sense, I guess?
Right, I never did put that in there. I did have a slide on, in Canada we have this thing called, well in Canada, we're in Canada, sorry. I'm so used to talking in the States that my bad, sorry. In the West, Scott Chalmers, actually, I don't know if it's Scott's baby or not, but we have this thing called land equivalency ratio. So think of it this way, a monocrop, if I had a 100-acre field and I had 50 acres of lentils and 50 acres of mustard, and the yield is together, like they're on their own, that's, whatever the yield is, that's one. That's a one. So anything above that is an improvement. So basically, when we do an intercrop, our farm average has probably been about a 1.3 or 1.4. Scott's seen 1.9, which so nearly double, right? That's kind of been the numbers that they've seen. 2017 being so dry, we had a couple of our crops, we've seen a 1. First time we've ever had a wash. But so we've been doing this since 2011, intercropping, and we've seen 1.7, 1.8. I mean, it's been 2016, like our chickpea monocrop friends maybe beat us by 2 or 3 bushels of chickpeas, but we cut 15 bushels of flax, and our inputs were about $100 an acre less. So I guess, and I mean, it's not super easy. I mean, the cleaning thing, it takes some effort, but I mean, now that we've learned to build on that and we use the grain cleaner to supply a clean product, that gives us an extra benefit. Like that's usually worth a couple cents a pound just to have clean product, so you can stick it in a sea can, you get your money back, and that more than covers the cleaning costs.
Excellent. I'm going to give one last question, then we're going to wrap up here. Have you assessed the impact of the compost extractants and teas alone? And if so, what's the benefits you think you're seeing with them?
Well, yeah, like we tested it. Tannis does is that the question? Maybe tell me that again.
Yeah, I'll read it to you again. Have you assessed the impact of compost extractants and teas alone, or is it, part of the bigger picture that you're looking at them with?
Well, a little bit of both. This year, we did do some trials, but with no rain, nothing was thriving. I look at every tea and extract under the microscope and assess it to see what we're putting out before we're putting it out, because we want to make sure we're getting diversity out there, basically. So I'm hoping this year with some rain, we can do some more trials and actually see some overall results. We're seeing improvement, but I don't have numbers to really say how much.
Okay. We just felt that seeing a visual improvement at all on a year like this, when we know that the biology is, it's a moisture-driven thing, right? And we were dry, I've never seen it like that. And we still had enough moisture in the seed row to drive the system, and I thought any improvement on a year like this was a really good improvement.
Appreciate that. Let's show our appreciation for a great presentation.